Hey there, my name's Dylan Lee, and I'm here with the GRAC Cooperative Academy to teach you a little bit about the fundamentals of cooperation. I was a president of the Grand Rapids Alliance of Cooperative Communities back in 2021, and a little bit before that I was secretary. And during my term, I learned a lot about these principles and these processes of running a board and facilitating the relationship between staff and membership. And I wanted to do a gift to GRAC and any other cooperatives that are listening, any members that are trying to brush up their board chops, and present something to you that I was given by the SHC, the Spartan Housing Cooperative, as well as Jim Jones. The Cooperation Begins With You booklet that was made by NASCO back in the 80s. And inside of it, it's got a ton of information that I'm basically going to be reading off here, so all credit goes to them. But I just wanted to make it nice and easy for everybody to get started on informing themselves what their role is in the cooperative, what the board's role is as serving as a mediator and planner, and what the staff's role is as they carry out the operations of the organization. So without further ado, this was adapted from NASCO, and we're going to focus on chapters 1 and 2 of this binder that I just showed you. And here's the handy dandy cover that I scanned as well. And it's important to read this off as I go, so forgive me as I read. As a member of a co-op's board of directors, you, I'm assuming you're training, are responsible for your co-op's success as a principal business. A business focused on meeting people's needs, not on profit. Your personal leadership, your knowledge and skills, your interactions with members, staff, and the public as a co-op director, your creativity and your input will have an impact on the co-op's ability to function efficiently and democratically. As a volunteer leader in the community in which you live, you will seldom be off the job. This handbook is intended as an orientation tool on ongoing handbook for Student Housing Cooperative Board of Directors. It is not an exhaustive treatise on every subject of interest to a board. That's already been written. It is simply an introduction to the central concerns facing you as a director. The purpose of the handbook is to emphasize the importance of your role as a director, to outline the nature of that role, and to give you the information and tools you need to get off on the right foot as a board member. It is also meant as a springboard for discussion among new and returning board members, and is laced with questions and issues you might choose to take up in the process of making your co-op a better place to live. The handbook also provides several models developed by NASCO staff that we feel work well for student co-ops, based on our years of experience working with you. Thus, some sections, such as those about finances, planning, staff structure, and board operations, will give you pictures against which to compare your co-op's current practices. So, board training and orientation are not necessarily the same thing. A board training program, in fact, may be better invested in a board that has been through an effective orientation and has had a little time to feel its way through some decisions as a group, identify key strengths and weaknesses in the co-op, and get an idea of where its priorities should lie. This handbook does not stand alone as board orientation. Board orientation should consist of an overview of the work of the previous term or year's board, an overview of what an overview of what faces the board for the coming term or year, and an explanation of the planning process used by the co-op. An introduction to the board's procedures, such as record keeping, rules of order, and committee structure. An introduction to the mechanics of how the co-op is run, staff job descriptions, office procedures, etc. An explanation of financial statements and the budget. Hopefully you've got one that's up to date. Ice breaking, group building, games, introductions, dinners, etc. Reading this whole handbook, hopefully. and looking over materials specific to your co-op, such as recent minutes and manager reports, policy notebook, current planning documents, and committee instruction sheets. Regarding orientation planning and format, continuing board members, especially officers, and the co-op's manager are best qualified to plan an orientation for new board members. Sessions or activities should be planned well in advance so that people can schedule around them and can come prepared by reading materials ahead of time, planning a presentation for new members, and so forth. All board members, new and old, must be present for some parts of the orientation, especially introductions and social times, and the overview of the coming term of year. It's best to have everyone there for everything, since there will be more of a chance to get to know each other, and old board members are likely to be surprised at what they might learn. Besides using a board meeting for orientation, set aside a weekend afternoon or some other free time and find a pleasant, quiet, retreat-like setting away from the pressure of a business meeting. Involve your staff and include social time. For ongoing support of new board members, a good tool is a buddy system that assigns each new member to an old member. Now we come to the basics of cooperation, where we blend business and social responsibility. The word cooperative, when applied to a business, has a certain meaning and a fascinating history. Co-ops grew out of people's visions for a better world, and our day-to-day work in our co-ops will be enriched by keeping a sense of these visions alive. The definitions of cooperatives are varied, but they include two very important elements: the spirit of cooperation, which are the values that underlie our actions, our commitment to creating a democratic society in which people have control over the organizations that provide for their needs. And two, the structure of cooperation. This is the specific business structure we create to put our values into practice. And in general, a cooperative is a member-owned, member-controlled business which operates according to the cooperative principles. And that takes us to the history of the first cooperatives and the 6 cooperative principles that we now use to define the nature of a cooperative. They appeared originally in their form in the 1840s. A group of textile workers fired and then blacklisted after an unsuccessful weavers' strike formed the Rochdale Society of Equitable Pioneers. They're now recognized as the first consumer co-op of the form in which we know them today. The principles by which they operated, the Rochdale Society, have evolved over the years into the cooperative principles we now use. These principles have been adopted by the International Cooperative Alliance and form the basis for the organization of cooperatives all over the world. So, here in the presentation, I've got the 7 cooperative principles that are listed in the GRAC bylaws, and I'll list those briefly before I go into the cooperative principles as defined by the ICA, because I think it's important whenever you're working with a local context or a specific organization to pay particular attention to the legal documents that form that organization and that your executive team and your staff are accountable to. So the first of which is the Articles of Incorporation, which dictates your document hierarchy and the following document structure. And then the bylaws, which dictate the governance as well as the decision-making procedures and general principles of the organization. Then, if you're so lucky and have an effective document creation process, you may have a policy handbook or a policy notebook, which defines the operations, procedures, and policies that have been agreed upon in the past and collect a categorized record of those types of operations. You may even be successful in creating a record of the consensus decisions of the organization. If you don't have a direct record, make sure you speak with your secretary or another individual in the history of the organization that knows how to gather previous decisions made in the minutes of meetings, like board meetings and executive committee meetings and house meetings, so that everybody has a good understanding of what it is that they're functioning on. But again, these come from GRAC's bylaws, and I'll expand on the original cooperative principles in the next slide. So, number one, GRAC believes in voluntary and open membership and the spirit of cooperation, neutrality, especially with regard to politics, democratic member control involving one member, one vote, education, which is a principle both inside and outside of the organization, a concern for community, also both inside and outside of the organization, that we're fulfilling the needs of members and also serving to bring those benefits to outside members and show them what the benefits of cooperatives are, as well as continuous expansion. This one's a very important part of the cooperation amongst cooperatives, in the sense that if you develop an expanding organization, it becomes resilient to the disturbances of difficulty over time, so that as you have an interdependent network of more buildings or more members or more organizations working together, you're able to weather the storm as a collective rather than individually weathering that test alone. So, based on the Rochdale Cooperative and the ICA's development of mission principles from that point, I live right next to the cops, so sorry about the siren. The first is open and voluntary membership, which I found in communist countries is not always a guarantee, and other countries as well. Co-ops do not restrict membership for any social, political, or religious reasons. They are open to all persons who can make use of their services and are willing to accept the responsibilities of membership. 2. One member, one vote. Each member has equal voting power, regardless of financial investment in the cooperative. This is an important difference between co-ops and conventional businesses, in which voting rights are in proportion to investment in terms of shares, especially in IPO situations. Many co-ops have a board of directors elected by the membership that oversees the business of the cooperative. 3. The return of surplus to members. Any surplus or profit arising out of the co-op's operations belongs to the members. Part of it may be distributed to the members on the basis of patronage, the amount of goods or services the member bought from the co-op. In housing co-ops, it is often retained in a way of providing additional services, reducing future charges, or adding to reserves. At GRAC, particularly, this means a stronger maintenance and capital improvement reserve, so that we can increase the quality of the housing in that organization. And 5, education of members and the public. Education in the principles and practices of cooperation encourages member participation. Education of the public lets people know about the economic benefits of cooperation and the services available through co-ops. And 6, cooperation among cooperatives. The principle of mutual self-help that forms any individual co-op extends logically to networks of cooperatives. All co-ops are strengthened through communication and assistance, often through the channels of organizations, local, regional, national, and international. NASCO is one such organization, and I highly encourage you to attend NASCO's annual trainings. I've been there, and they're so good. So this brings us to the types of cooperatives that exist. Cooperatives are classified by function, into three general categories, although the co-op structure can be adapted to almost any type of business. We've got consumer co-ops, which is a group of individuals who provide themselves with the highest quality goods or services at the lowest possible price, where housing, food, and daycare are the primary examples that people recognize. And I want to emphasize quality being an important factor of why co-ops exist. Then there's also producer co-ops, which are comprised of individual producers who market their products as a group to non-member consumers. Producer co-ops help their members obtain production-related goods and services at the lowest possible costs. This includes agricultural co-ops and craft or artisanal co-ops. This is especially important with small farms, where if you have 10 small farmers and none of them really have enough time or energy or supply to make enough money at the farmers markets, that it doesn't really serve them to put it all together. If a cooperative united those 10 small farmers and picked up their goods, kept them stored, and sold them and managed the staff to sell them and all these other things, dispersing the funds equitably in return, or purchasing them outright in the first place, this would massively reduce the costs of overhead for each of the individuals and lead to greater prosperity in general. This is the more clear economic model in the United States, and has served as the basis of a lot of the historical success of the cooperative movement in America. But there's also worker cooperatives, which is any kind of business or industry in which the members are both the workers and the collective owners. A worker co-op furnishes its members with employment as well as the benefits of workplace ownership and control. Things like bakeries, plywood manufacturing, food processing, and even Ace Hardware, weirdly enough, is a really huge worker co-op. So, there's another page here with the cooperative movement and the student housing cooperatives. It's a useful part of the read. If you want to go into the manual, I highly encourage you to do that. But I want to save a little bit of time here and jump right into the co-op organizational structure and function. Co-op structure breaks down at its most basic level into three parts: members, who receive the services of the co-op; staff, who carry out the daily operations to provide the services; and the board of directors, who monitor operations and plan for the future. So this little graph that's provided by this binder is excellent for being able to understand how the organizational dynamic in a co-op is very circular. There's a lot of interdependence in the way that boards are structured in cooperatives, and this is also how a lot of businesses are structured in the corporate world. So if you feel like, oh, this is too corporate for a co-op, I understand that criticism, and I understand that you want to keep things non-hierarchical and make sure that people's voices are heard. But because of the nature of accountability and democracy, it's very important that you be able to appoint, elect, and advise in ways that have checks and balances. And the kinds of relationships between these groups you can see between members and the board of directors and members and committees are very important to consider, especially. So ultimately, remember that you on the board, I'm assuming that I'm talking to somebody who's being trained right now, are accountable directly to your members. You report to them. And it's really easy to think, oh, I should just do whatever the members say. But in the same way that politics in the United States has gotten kind of gross, that there's campaign promises and then there's lack of follow-through, it's really important for you to consider the duties of the organization and to serve the members as best as possible with the information that you have. and that may involve informing them, reporting to your members reports about the decisions that you're making and the reasoning why. Because if, let's say, you have to increase your rent prices, that's controversial. That's going to get people pretty upset, especially if it's a lot. But if you deliver to them an analysis or like a short summary of how bad your financials are in the cooperative at that moment, and you say that if we delivered this much of an increase on rent, we would have this much. And if we delivered this much, we would have this much. And you find a middle ground, and you vote on it, you deliberate, and you agree as a board to set that as the plan. Then that goes out into committees, even, for other people to interpret those objectives and to be able to do the work of changing the leases, of making sure that when you're advertising space to prospective new members, that the listing is correct on all of your advertisements online, that you have basically an objective that goes out to everybody in the organization as a ratified decision, and each of those people is able to interpret and work toward those objectives collectively. So with the manager, you advise committees on how to carry out those kinds of operations, and committees also advise to managers how to carry out those objectives in organizations. Because of the nature of them being members, it's basically the same as members and managers communicating back and forth to figure it out, how to carry out the functions of the organization. So with committees, they can be appointed by the board, they can be appointed by the membership via vote, but ultimately you want to create committees like financial committees for budgeting, perhaps a labor committee for tracking the volunteer labor hours of the organization. It can be any type of committee. It can be ad hoc even, like particularly at GRAC right now, they're trying to hire a new general manager, so there's a hiring committee. And it's important that those committees have clear inputs and outputs. So you give them objectives, you give them plans, you give them things as the board or the manager or the members voice an opinion. And then their outputs ought to be something that's clear and deliverable to the other parts of the organization. So they advise the board of directors based on the results of their deliberation. So say the financial committee puts together a budget. They say to the board of directors, here's the budget. Or they say, let's take the rent increase example. The committee, the financial committee, will put together a brief based on a proposal that would then be used to help explain to the membership during the decision-making process what that result ought to be according to best business practices. So you can see that there's a lot of interdependence, and the way that power is distributed in cooperative organizations is intended to be a little bit bureaucratic and a little slow, so that you can change carefully, so that you can steer committees and steer organizational changes without too much disruption from term to term. So that's another part that's kind of like our government. But it's important to know how the functions of each of these three groups are more precisely defined. So members serve the function of receiving the services that the co-op provides, which is like their number one objective. To vote, which is huge. In Tuesday, November 8th, we've got an election this term. Go out and vote for real out in your local elections. Vote, give input to democratically elected board. so use your voice. Attend meetings and keep aware of co-op issues, which can include the purchase or sale of property. It can include upcoming inspections. It can include financial investments or emergency management topics, all sorts of things. And paying charges promptly is huge. If you don't pay on time, the whole co-op suffers immensely. So it's not just a small thing to pay late. Please be very careful. Understand co-op principles and the workings of the co-op by learning meetings like these and other things, and continuous reading and development. And assist the co-op in maintaining good community image. This is big because co-ops are kind of seen like frat houses sometimes. And the fact is, I think we're better than that. I think that we can have outstanding ethics, quality, and concern for welfare of humans and animals in our community. We also have some pretty important staff functions to carry out, which is the purpose of the general manager at GRAC: to attend to daily administration and operations, to advise the board, assist in planning and policymaking, to implement plans, budgets, and policies, and to educate membership. This is a lot to do, especially the way email has become such a huge part of daily life in this world. So it's important to pay them respectfully and to make sure that they are supported in whatever ways are necessary to avoid burnout and to remain clear on the purpose and vision of the organization. And if they're not on board with the co-op the way that the board sees it, or if they're in constant conflict with the ideals and decisions of the board and the membership, then they ought to be fired, and or at least talked to, some kind of remediation initiated, and if that doesn't work in a certain amount of time, then fired with a new replacement in the queue before firing. And if you can't have somebody in the queue before you fire somebody, y'all better have really good documentation on what you expect your general manager to do, because you're going to have to carry it out in their stead. But I'm getting off topic a little bit here, because this is an issue currently at hand. Also, the board functions are super important to understand, because a lot of people see the board as like a shadowy dictatorship zone, and it's not. Like, there are people that live at the cooperative, as well as people who have experience with business administration and are trying to deliver the best that they can with the small amount of time that they're able to volunteer. So they have to develop and monitor plans for overall cooperation, approve and monitor budgets and financial reports, hire or appoint, evaluate, and fire management, and communicate regularly with membership, which is huge. If your board doesn't know what the heck it's doing, the membership ought to know soon. And if they do know what they're doing, their membership should be regularly informed that they're doing a great job by both the board itself and by other members. Because if you can support your board and you can feel good about it, that's going to make them feel so much healthier. And believe me, burnout mostly comes from the resentment and the pain of emotionally taking on that large of a burden for free. So please do your best to respect your board, and if they're in a place where they're not performing up to the level that you would like them to, please be compassionate and do whatever you can to support them in reaching that level, or do whatever you can to appoint somebody to replace them and find them a better fit in the organization that their strengths will be excellent within, because everybody in the entire organization has strengths that can be used to lift the entire cooperative, let alone perhaps even the communities outside of the cooperative. And this this goes directly into what I think the job description of board managers or board directors are, rather. Also, student co-ops are all managed differently. Many have no paid staff, and some have no board of directors, which would really suck, depending on their size and the complexity of their operations. If a co-op has no paid staff, then you'll find that there are a few members who take on a very high level of responsibility for the co-op's operations. These member volunteers are, in effect, the co-op staff, and you'll see them performing such functions as supervising other member volunteers, ensuring that bills and debts are paid, implementing member education programs such as orientations, and working closely with the board of directors. The board of directors' job description is pretty well enumerated in this binder as well. The general responsibilities are to provide overall direction for the co-op on behalf of the membership, to ensure sound management to achieve goals of the cooperative, and to be accountable to the membership. Accountability is a term that I had to learn the depths of as president, because it turns out in an organization there's a way of passing the buck and avoiding things and saying that's not my job. And that happens a lot in every organization. And ultimately that will pass up the hierarchy, all the way up to the board, all the way up to the president, and perhaps it stops there. Perhaps it gets passed up to the general manager. But it really stops there at the peak of either of those two hierarchies. And if they're not accountable to the needs of the organization and to the membership, then those things don't get done. They have to take responsibility, and they have to understand that it's their problem. And once you have boundaries, once you have boundaries well defined on what you're supposed to be doing, you'll be able to say what you're accountable to and what you're not accountable to. So having these kinds of specific responsibilities laid out for the directors, for the staff, and for the membership helps everybody to better share the load of this huge burden of organizing and self-helping and self-controlling your organization. These specific responsibilities include establishing long-term purpose and goals, approving annual objectives, setting major policies and standards, hiring, appointing, evaluating, and firing management, approving staff structure and salary benefits, chartering corporate committees, which is in a sociocratic model like GRAC's, making sure that circle leads are in power, approving capital and operating budgets, ensure adequate reserves and profitable operations, approve major changes in assets, so acquisitions or liquidations, purchasing, sales, monitor progress towards goals and achievement of objectives, which is basically project management, monitor financial position and financial management, which includes making sure that the GM and treasurer are accurately keeping records and regularly reviewing the quality of that process. Establish systems for member knowledge of and input to plans, report to members at least annually. I say that every month they should get a good copy of the minutes of the board meetings at least. Appoint an auditor and legal counsel. This is huge. If you don't have somebody to talk with your lawyer and be at court, if you wind up in court, then it can all kind of crumble pretty fast. 11, representing the co-op in legal action. And 12, perpetuate strong board through elections and training. And this is part of why I'm doing this, because I feel like it's part of my responsibility, even though I've been living outside of GRAC for over a year now, to help the training and the experience of this organization in whatever way I can, because I care so much about the vision of this cooperative to provide good, safe, affordable housing in Grand Rapids, where I grew up. There's also individual director job descriptions, where generally you serve on the central decision-making body, acting in members' best interests. And your specific responsibilities include attending all meetings of the board of directors and of the membership. So the number of absent members that I've seen in GRAC's past is laughable. If you don't have people showing up, you can't run the organization. 2, keeping informed in all areas of co-op management and activities. 3, serve actively on at least one committee or special project. 4, make timely reports of your work to the full board, which includes basically getting those distributed out prior to the approval of the agenda during the meetings. 5, follow all rules and regulations of the co-op. Basically, serve as an ideal example of a cooperator. 6, provide leadership through dedication, honesty, and personal responsibility. 7, represent the co-op to members and the community in a positive manner. And 8, attain the knowledge and skills necessary to function effectively as a director. So, in conclusion, basically, the board of directors is the pivot point of the co-op management team. The members, board, and staff. The board not only makes decisions, but is the real and symbolic leadership body of the cooperative. You're a part of providing that leadership, and you ensure quality services to your membership, a healthy working environment for your staff, and the continuation of an effective board. So as you read through the rest of this handbook, you'll be learning the essential pieces of your job as a co-op board member. And make no mistake, though it may be unpaid, this is still a job. So please do it well. Good luck, GRAC. And to anybody that's watching this from outside of the cooperative, perhaps you were a previous member, perhaps you're another cooperative that wants to learn some of these principles for yourself and apply them into your board and to your operations, I highly encourage you to reach out. GRAC.org is the website that we use, gracc.org. And there's a lot of ways that you can get involved to help GRAC through its current sort of emergency management situation. If you want to learn more about the details of the change management policies in place right now, we're working with the Spartan Housing Cooperative to make sure that the board is well trained and that a variety of situations are avoided, including financial insolvency and property disrepair and a variety of other things that are always something you have to fight against if you're trying to run an organization smoothly. So also, if you have experience as a general manager, if you have experience administering at the board level, if you have feedback on what you think a good general manager would be for GRAC, especially come talk to the board, email staff@grac.org, go to the Facebook for GRAC, Grand Rapids Alliance of Cooperative Communities, or otherwise reach out to me, Dylan Lee, at dylanmichaellee@gmail.com, spelled the way it is in the beginning of this PowerPoint presentation, and reach out, because we need help, just like everybody else needs help, and if you come out and help us out, we'll do our best to help you out too, because cooperation's a two-way street. I really appreciate you taking the 40 minutes that this took. It can basically be delivered as part of a less than 1 hour meeting, so don't be afraid to include this as part of your training. You have permission to adapt it and change it however you wish, and especially I want to give another bibliography shout out to NASCO, and particularly Karen Evans, who created the binder that we've been using today. Another copy was recently created by Emily Tyler, based on that and some other materials that I may be switching to. But in general, if you want to hear more about cooperative education, come back to the GRAC Cooperative Academy, and we'll have more videos on how you can level up your skills as a cooperator. Namaste.